On Wednesday night, I was on a train in Sydney heading into the city from a concert, and I was surrounded by a young female friendship group of about 6 or 7. And I started listening into their conversation when one shouted, "How could this tangerine tyrant get back in?" Now, obviously, it didn't take a lot to know who they were referring to and what they were talking about. It was only hours after Donald Trump claimed victory in the US election. Now, I would say these girls would have probably been in their early 20s, but what really struck me was how upset and angry these young Australian women were. And I'm talking visibly, passionately angry by the result. One went on to say how dumb the US is, that this is terrible for women, that women have no voice in the world, and how, quote, Marmala, as in Kamala Harris, would have been the best thing for the world. Now, I certainly don't expect that everyone is going to take a keen interest in US politics here at home and do some serious research about what's actually going on in America. But for me, listening to how upset these young females were, I realised it represents a bigger problem. Because this next generation don't seem to ask questions about the narrative they're being fed by the left. In this case, the fake misogyny narrative and the scare campaigns run by progressives on social media. And to ask not how Donald Trump got back in, but why Donald Trump got back in. You don't have to like the man, that's fine. But to say that this is terrible for women and women have no voice in the world, what a load of rubbish. That is a line straight out of the progressive left playbook, a line that we've heard over and over throughout this election campaign.
A world where we have the freedom to control our bodies.
And the freedom of women to choose what we do with our bodies.
The freedom of every woman to make decisions about her own body and her reproductive freedom.
And the nonsense has just brainwashed young women around the world and right here at home to think that A, their rights are at risk, and B, that men hate women. Have a listen to this nonsense by so-called Australian influencer Abby Chatfield.
If you're a woman in Australia and you think the US election doesn't affect us, just know they now have permission to be outwardly sexist and support a rapist. Just know that. In your heart, know that they now have permission. They now think they are the majority, and they're so uneducated that they think that because they're the majority, they are right. They now have permission to be racist, transphobic. They have permission to laugh about our reproductive health and our reproductive freedoms. Australia follows suit when it comes to America.
The hysteria and misinformation is frightening. Trump's victory has nothing to do with hating women. In fact, female turnout was a significant part of Kamala Harris's election loss. Exit polls conducted by CNN showed that the Democratic vice president had an 8-point advantage among women voters, but that was nearly half of what Joe Biden had mustered 4 years ago. According to the Washington Post, the gender gap was 11 points. Significant, but mostly in line with previous elections, suggesting this wasn't largely about men being unwilling to vote for a woman. It's because men voted for their hip pocket. They want to work, get a job, help pay the bills. That is not misogynistic. It comes from desperation, a place caused by the left. You see, the Democrats expected women to vote for a candidate simply because of her sex, not for her principles, her beliefs, or what she stood for, but because she is a woman. And clearly voters saw through it. Donald Trump easily demolished Harris because he was the better candidate. And the left are struggling to accept this because their whole narrative has been shot to pieces. In fact, we now have a situation in the US where liberal women are shaving their heads to protest the patriarchy.
And I'm talking to you too, those of you ladies who have the internalized misogyny required to do what you did.
It's just extraordinary. In fact, the election of Donald Trump has triggered a surge of social media posts and internet search interest in South Korea's fringe feminist 4B movement, which calls on women to refrain from dating, having sex with men, having kids, and marrying men. Would you believe it? You cannot make this stuff up. And where is it coming from? Well, here is the liberal media blaming white women for Trump's success.
Black voters came through for Kamala Harris. White women voters did not. This will be the second opportunity that white women in this country have to change the way that they interact with the patriarchy.
The narrative does not stack up. The media and the Democrats learned nothing from 2016 when Hillary Clinton expected women to get her over the line. Instead, the Harris campaign patronised conservative women. It was so bad, actress Julia Roberts narrated an ad urging women not to tell their husbands who they voted for.
Your turn, honey.
In the one place in America where women still have a right to choose, you can vote any way you want, and no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Remember, what happens in the booth stays in the booth. Vote Harris Walls.
I mean, it's just truly pathetic. The Democrats really thought that women would have to lie to their husbands about how they vote. It assumes that women are not concerned by issues facing the country. It assumes that women don't understand and can't even think for themselves. And it assumes that Harris banging on about reproductive rights and abortions would be sufficient. Because, of course, that must be the only thing women care about, right? God forbid women caring about the cost of living crisis. And Trump's win wasn't just a vote for a better economy or better security. It was a vote against the establishment, a vote against the woke, the left-leaning media, open borders and uncontrolled immigration, encampments on college campuses run by terrorist sympathisers, men infiltrating women's sport, men allowed into women's only spaces under the guise of being trans, the obsession with DEI, diversity, equality and inclusion. Americans rejected the lies they've been fed by the left. So the woke have really no business crying, apparently shaving their heads and having meltdowns over Trump's win because it's all their own fault. Their own carry-on helped hand Trump a win. And I would say now to the left in Australia, take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror because the game is over. Anthony Albanese should be worried. The culture wars started by him, like the Voice referendum, matter. Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, the face of the No campaign, told The Australian today, the US election has shown people are beginning to wake up to the fact that they are allowed to vote on the basis of merit rather than race or any other identity. Now, I'm sure the young women sitting next to me on the train the other night will probably never really have an open, in-depth discussion about the ins and outs of Trump's victory and poor old Kamala Harris, but they represent so much about what is wrong with the sentiment of the left. And that narrative was blown apart on November 5. Well done to the US for standing up to it. And let's hope Australia does the same at the next federal election.